WP, two warlords agree that their newfound peace contract between their peoples would be best sealed with a marriage. With no available daughters, sisters, nieces or female cousins on either side, the two conclude they must marry each other. Welcome to the prompt. All top-level comments must be a story or poem. Reply here for other comments. Reminders. Greater than stories at least 100 words. Poems, 30 but include, poem, responses don't have to fulfill every detail greater than C, reality fiction. Some URL, and, simple prompts. Some URL, for stricter titles greater than, be civil. Some URL, in any feedback and follow the, rules. Some URL. Hashtag icon help, what is this? Some URL. Hashtag icon information, new here? Some URL. Hashtag icon help, writing help? Some URL. Hashtag icon exclamation, announcements. Some URL. Hashtag icon comments, Discord chatroom. Some URL. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please, contact the moderators of this subreddit /message/compose/?2=r/writing prompts, if you have any questions or concerns. The people of Norfrost would be happy to honor your terms. We cannot pretend to have the same army we once did, but neither can you. Relations between our people were peaceful for centuries, and I am sure it would relieve both sides to be able to sleep without fear of another attack. Bram finished his rehearsed line carefully. He sat straight up in his seat, his plastered-on smile only barely concealing the fear within him. The chair, a flimsy southern thing, protested loudly as he shifted, waiting on the other man. For years, he'd pressed for peace. For years, his people had died by the thousands, and killed by the thousands, as well. He was tired. Norfrost was suffering the coldest winter he could recall. He could remember the bitter forced smile of the camp cook and his wife. We'd all have starved to death last year, if we'd all survived. Both of their sons had died under Bram's command. They had been good men. This was their last hope. Their last chance for survival, entirely dependent on the whims of his peculiar dinner companion, Duran of the Southern Hills. Duran was all hard lines where Bram was soft, fire where Bram was ice, exuberant where Bram preferred the quiet. They'd met before, twice, to attempt to come to terms. Both times ended in bloodshed, and Bram knew that only one thing could have changed his enemy's mind at this point: he couldn't win either. His people were as starved and desperate as Bram's. Duran's only real terms for peace were that Bram's people helped us through this awful, desperate winter. The south was used to warm climates and rolling green hills. This winter had killed all of their delicate crops and frozen their rivers. Duran had sent word inviting Bram to dine with him in his enormous tent, and Bram had reluctantly made the ride out that afternoon. He waited. Duran didn't move. Bram allowed himself a moment to wish that the other man had simply fallen asleep in his seat, eyes wide open. But Duran blinked, those empty eyes betraying nothing. And then in an instant, as if he would burst if he stayed still a moment longer, Duran pushed back his chair and moved it around the table, sitting closer to Bram. Close enough that Bram reached for the knife hidden on his hip, a reflex. Not a very well hidden one, apparently, as Duran's gaze dropped to watch and his mouth twisted into something resembling a smile. Finally, he spoke, the thick southern smoothing over the words, in a tone almost comforting. I know you believe this could be a trap. It could be. But it isn't. Neither of us are so stubborn as to end our entire bloodline over territory. My people have suffered long enough, as have yours. Our people were once as one. Let them learn to live with each other again. He clapped Bram on the shoulder twice, sat back, folded his hands in his lap. There is the issue, though, Duran said with a curious look on his face, of how this union should be made official. In days past, we would marry, son to daughter, brother to sister. They made a dozen babies and the people loved them all. A marriage is good for the people. A marriage they see with their eyes, they feel it. A piece of paper filled with promises. Less so. Bram had hoped for this. He had a half-dozen brothers and cousins at the ready. Marriages between them had always meant peace, at least for a few generations. I could not agree more. I have spoken with several members of my family already, at length, and each understands what may be asked of them. Then, we treat An hour or more and several sheafs of paper later, terms negotiated, boundaries set, drinks shared, both men felt a little more at ease. The last matter was the marriage pact. Bram sank into his chair a little and loosened the collar of his coat. He was drowsy now, his thoughts a little fuzzier around the edge. He almost felt cheerful. Duran handed the papers to his companion, with orders to copy everything exactly as it had been written. Names could be added later. Duran, my new friend. Our last matter is at home, and a happy one it will be. Our families joined together again. Do you have many suitable family members of age? Only a few, my brother, just 20, a great warrior with a warm heart. My uncle, halfway through his life with a sharp mind to match. My youngest brother is not yet 10, I would hesitate to marry him off so young if we had other options. Oh. All men? No women? Not a one. My mother thinks we're cursed. I have 4 cousins, all male, all married. My father was one of 6 boys. 6. This could be a bit of a problem then. Bram looked into the fire across the tent. How do you think? For the first time in hours, the southerner's smile faltered. Well. Bram cleared his throat. It would appear that our families suffer from similar afflictions. I have no sisters. Not a female cousin to speak of. Only a very elderly aunt, nearly gone to rest. I had been counting on your having at least one female relation. Duran shook his head slowly, trying to work his way around the new information. So. No girls? He rubbed at his eyes. That complicates things. A marriage pact is the only option at this point. You're sure there's nobody? Not a single distant cousin? Duran's head hadn't stopped shaking, and Bram's fear had returned fully. What did this mean for their newfound peace? A treaty was not enough. Words were not enough. The 2 men sat in silence for a long time. Bram was startled by the obnoxiously loud clap of Duran's hands. Duran leapt from his seat, pacing about. How far back does your history go? Duran was on to something. Oh, we have several hundred years of books and stories. Not much before that, I'm afraid. So you remember the Quiet Kings? And the fair pair? Phoebe and Elena? Bram did. He blanched and said nothing. Duran took no notice. Marriages don't necessarily need someone with opposite parts. Not political ones. A union, a shared roof over their heads, that's all. The children, yes, but the Quiet Kings raised a small army of orphan children. I'm not so sure it would work in this case, the people. Duran stopped in front of Bram's chair, dropping to one knee to be level with him. The people will see that we've done whatever it takes, that we both were willing to make great sacrifices for them. They will respect that, celebrate it even. He ducked to catch Bram's gaze. Don't tell me you people up in the north have started feeling queasy about marriages. Like this? Bram started. Certainly not. It happens now and then. But not usually for a king. Then it will be fine. Unless you object? How simple he made it sound. Then it will be fine. Bram's selection of suitable women had dwindled down to near nothing. He'd been 2 cold winters away from marrying a washerwoman. He was expected to carry on the family line. That would be changing. I don't object at all. And no. That settles it. Duran stood, and for a moment, Bram had the strangest feeling that the other man might stoop down to kiss him. Tomorrow we wed. At sunset, on the high hill. I will tell my people when we break fast. You should return home, gather your own. Tomorrow. He breezed out of the tent, a thunderous laugh fading out as he walked. And then he was gone. Bram was speechless. He certainly had not expected this day to end like this. Before he left the tent to find his horse, he allowed himself a small moment to celebrate. A genuine smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. He corrected it just in time to step outside, order his men to escort him back. There had been a reason Bram had never married. It had nothing to do with blushing brides and what a washerwoman kept under her dress. Nothing at all. And there had always been rumors of Duran's, escapades, of all kinds. Truth be told, if Duran had kissed him, he'd have liked that very much. Okay, on the count of 3. 1. 1. 2. 2. 3. 3. A gray, Vaguely perforated mask lowered to reveal a face reminiscent of multiple phases of the moon, sharp eyes, pronounced nose, a sharp, shaved chin on a narrow face that was still vaguely circular with shadowy eyes and hair like a shadow draped on a slow dance across the sky. He smiled. The green mask collapsed in stages, a rugged face with a notable excess of facial hair intermingling with a wavy brown jungle and more than a few braids. The green of his eyes made the mask and all the green of the planet look dull by comparison. The green spoke first. "Oh. Whoa. I guess your mask wasn't lying. You're not playing fair, as usual. I don't know what I was supposed to expect. Have you ever shaved?" Hey. Relax, man. I spent less time shaving and more time calibrating my debris. Every hair meant one more of your men in the ground. For the first time in months, the smoke cleared enough to allow the sun to blanket some hundreds of final rests. "Did you take this way too seriously?" The gray leaned on a nearby half-standing wall. "Are you kidding me? I could see your cold, indifferent expression through that pockmarked mask of yours." "Hey. I'm trying to uphold tradition and—" "Say no more." The green blew some hair out of his eyes. "We already know what's to be done. Just so you know, I despise tradition. Every part of it." The gray threw his mask, it landed nowhere significant. The green broke the silence. "Oh. A pause. I hope this doesn't bother you, but I'm almost glad it turned out this way." "You're like that?" The green tried to hide some nervous laughter. The gray shook his head. "What are the odds?" "Of what?" "That this world would still move on after all this bloodshed. That such animosity could exist. That such small differences could drive people to such things. That we were the same way this whole time." The gray looked for his mask. "I'll believe anything at this point." The green sat down. "I'm ready to start believing again." "Sounds nice. The terms are set, my lords," a small elf said as he looked up from the scroll he had been furiously scribbling on. "Are you prepared to seal the pact officially?" "We are agreeable," Lord Justavian said. "Given that this is the first pact in history between humans and orcs, however, I do wish to hear verbal confirmation from my colleague here that the no more using human corpses as puppets rule is fully agreed to?" Yeah. We do it," the Orc High Warlord Thurok grunted. "Then our pact is indeed sealed. There shall be peace where for years our peoples knew only war," the human bellowed dramatically. "Great and glorious war to be sure, but—" "I'm sorry to interrupt, but is the pact actually sealed?" the elf interjected. "Although I fear having my head chopped off by either of you legendarily bloodthirsty warriors, I must note that every peace pact in history has not been sealed until there is a marriage between a son and daughter of the opposing factions. I'm afraid the females in my family, I guess you'd say deserted our cause right around the time I invaded 3 mighty nations simultaneously a few years ago," Justavian said sheepishly. "Testosterone-fueled idiocy, I believe they termed my actions in the rather scathing letter they left me. The joke is of course on them, however. Now here I sit with the leader of one of those invaded nation, being forced to complete a peace pact with him after the senseless loss of the majority of our fighting forces and oh. Wait. I understand," the elf replied. "And Warlord Thurok? Females of marrying age in your royal bloodline?" "Me no girls neither, only dum-dum smelly lunkhead sons, many dozen dum-dums." "It seems that, to the best of my knowledge, Thurok's wife tragically died during the childbirth of the last of his lunkhead dum-dums. And Lord Justavian's wife? Relocated by her own free will, as he noted. So the both of you are technically single, and able to marry each other," the elf noted plainly. "What? That big no way!" Thurok shouted. "While I appreciate your assistance in negotiating this deal, Sir Elf, I must concur with my business associate, with whom I am forming an alliance with for the purposes of joint might and future conquest only. There simply must be another way. And #X200B. Smash cut 2. I cannot believe there wasn't another way," Justavian muttered with his face planted in his freshly ringed hand. "And what are the odds the elf was an ordained priest of both our religions who was able to marry us on the spot?" "Yeah, me not see that coming," his orc partner agreed. "The wedding rings are of a high quality at least. I take brief solace in that, In the moments before I gaze upon your ugly face once more and am reminded that it shall accompany me through the rest of my life. You not so pretty either. No horns, no sharp teeth, no muscles, useless." They bickered on for some time, but before they knew it was time for the wedding procession to officially unveil themselves as a couple to their people. The reactions were mixed, as you might imagine. "Lost the war to orcs, then had to marry one. You are no king of ours any longer," a human man shouted from the crowd. Throck wheeled around in a rage and grabbed the man out of sea of people. "This my wife, just a van, and you no speak to her that way. Once again, it's Jutavian, and I am not your wife, Throck. I'm still a man also, please tell me you are aware of this?" "So what we call us?" he asked Justavian, while still holding the terrified man tightly in his massive grip. "How would I know? As far as I know, we are not only the first orc/hum marriage, but also the first same-sex marriage in history. I suppose just husband and husband?" "Dat fine," the orc said to his spouse before he turned back to the heckler. "Dis my husband Justavian, you make sorry to him or I crush your skull with one hand." Throck held the man aloft high off the ground to emphasize his point. "I'm very sorry indeed. Forgive me please your lordships. Two mighty warriors such as yourselves are perhaps the finest match there's ever been." Justavian noted his new partner's behavior with some amount of pride. Sure, they bickered and mocked one another in private, but when some outsider did so they were incredibly swift and fierce in their defense of one another. Perhaps they had a chance to be a successful married couple after all, he thought to himself as the first hint of smile he'd had in days crossed his lips. Quick story before bed. Hope some folks enjoy. Feel free to check out r/writer if you'd like to explore more stories written by an orc who intentionally mispronounces human names just to mess with them. We need you, Valen says. His hands fist on his knees. He doesn't dare to look down to them, to see the white of his knuckles, the jut of his veins. He must look forward, and does, to the man who listens to him on the other side of the table. "Well, we don't need you," Kir responds, after a silent moment of thought. "But a want suffices, no? A want?" "Yes." Kir leans back on his hands. It was always strange to Valen, that they had no backs for their chairs here, but Valen doubts bad posture is tradition here. Perhaps it is, and Valen's straight spine and square shoulders are odd to see. "My country gains security from you. It's nothing much, but it's something. Another thing to repulse the West from invasion. And you are no longer enough of a threat to warrant suspicion. I would like that. I would want that." "No longer." The words are heavy to Valen, but Kir speaks them with such lightness. Such ease. It's not polite to be bitter. "Then you agree?" "Yes," Kir says. It is too simple, and Valen waits. "But, I have a condition." "What is it?" Valen asks, dread digging his nails into his palms. "My land and my people do not have much to give, and we are not asking to become your tributary state. We are asking for peace." "I'll give that to you, and nothing else," Kir says. "However, as you know, the war of our fathers was one that broke oath." "It was," Valen says. The agreement is acrid on his tongue. "I don't think either of our people trust words or papers. We need something more binding." Kir rests his elbows on the table. Valen can hear his old governess' scolding voice. "We need a marriage." Valen stares at him. "Do you have any unmarried female relatives?" Kir asks. "No," Valen says. He forces his fingers to unravel lest he bloodies his own hands. "My sisters died in the war." "As did mine," Kir says. A sour smile plays on his lips, Valen mirrors it. "My older brother, too. No nieces, no aunts?" "Also dead. Or married." Valen's stomach twists. "Can I not marry one of yours?" "I would let you," Kir says, "but it seems like we are in the same boat." Valen laughs, high and fleeting. "Really," Valen says, "I expected a rejection for many reasons. But not for something like this." "Rejection?" Kir says, brow furrowing. He leans forward. "Who said anything about rejection?" "Well, who will you marry?" "You." This time, Valen's laugh spills out for longer, and Valen only cuts it off when he realizes Kir wasn't joking. "Me?" Valen asks again. "Unless you have any other siblings," Kir says. Only my brother, the crown PR the king, I mean, Valen says. But he was promised to another long ago, to the fens. We cannot break oath now. Not even with your protection. Oh. Shame, Kyr says. It would have been nice to marry a king. His head tilts. The gold in his ears glint. Well, you'll be able to, if you marry me. I don't think I would find that very nice, Valen counters. He cannot help the sharpness of his voice, the razor edge of it. It tears through the silk he tries to bind it with. Am I that ugly? Kyr asks. No, Valen thinks. Kyr is not ugly. Kyr has cheeks high and sculpted like the sheer cliffs of the Darren Range. Kyr has flickering eyes, chatoyant and short-lashed and piercing. Kyr has a fine nose, a mouth good for smiling. Kyr has a lithe form, and just one of his hands could encompass Valen's ankle. That's not why, Valen evades, and you know that. I don't know anything, Kyr replies. He sips from his glass for the first time, the amber ale wetting his lips. He licks them. Valen refuses to become distracted. Why would it not be nice to marry me? I'm not going to be your queen, Valen says. He tries to stifle his fury, but he knows it shines through the way he bites out every syllable. I am not a woman. I wouldn't want you if you were. I am a man, Valen says again, confounded. I know I may not look like one to some people. You look like a man to me, Kyr says. I wouldn't want you if you didn't. Realization crashes over him like a wave. You really intend to marry me, Valen says. I even want to marry you, Kyr says. His smile is sweeter, now. Valen stands up, and Kyr does too. Want? Valen echoes. Everything is thundering in his skull. Yes. You offer my people another layer of security, and I give your people the same. Kyr spins his glass in his fingers. Not only that, but if you can believe it, you are a very beautiful man, and renowned for your manners, intelligence, and skill in combat. I am not quite as smart, and my demeanor is clumsy, as you may have noticed. I was a third child that happened to be a good swordsman, and then the war came, and now I am king. I am not good at ruling. I think you would be. Kyr looks at him then. So yes, I want to marry you. Does that not suffice? No, Valen wants to say. Wants to cry, maybe. But it does suffice, because Valen's people need comfort, need hope, need peace they can rely on and believe as they rebuild. They are who Valen need to protect, and it doesn't matter whether Kyr wants or needs, as long as that is gained. It does, Valen says, mouth dry. Kyr steps to him, picks up one of Valen's hands. He doesn't say anything about the crescent indent still carved into his skin, merely places his own glass into the curve of Valen's palm. Then drink, Kyr says. It's custom, here, to share drink whether you are making peace or pax. You will need to get used to that. Valen's hand trembles. Kyr's eyes are molten. Distantly, Valen supposes it would be nice, to marry a king. He must look forward. He must not falter. Valen raises the glass to his lips and drinks. The taste is sweet. King Mardius, Lord of the Eight Rivers, ruler of the walled cities, and first among the Novii perched uncomfortably in his plush chair, his ceremonial crown digging uncomfortably into his forehead. He pushed down his discomfort, however, as he regarded his counterpart across the polished conference table. Decius Centrus, Light of the West, Thunder of the Dawn and Overlord of the Low Kings, mirrored Hecatron's discomfort. He sat on the very edge of the chair, hands clasped in his lap where they peeked out of his voluminous sleeves. Somewhere under his ancestral headdress, his hair was caught in the chain links and was tugging painfully at his scalp. Decius cleared his throat. I think we can both agree that this can't go on any longer, he said. Mardius grunted noncommittally. I have been told that the omens favor a end to conflict, he replied carefully. They lapsed into silence for a moment. The tent in which they sat shifted lightly in the wind, the gaps showing peaks of a blasted landscape, still littered with broken forms even days after their final, disastrous battle. Mardius cleared his throat. I propose that we end all warring between our people forthwith, he said, not quite looking at his rival. Agreed, Decius said quickly. There was another silence as visions of the devastation of the past few days played through their heads. I believe, Decius continued, that the usual way to do these things, is through joining our houses. Indeed, Martius said, nodding slightly. I believe that you have several daughters of marriageable age. Had, Decius corrected. Our house was ravaged by plague in the second year of our conflict, and took both my daughters and my darling wife. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Your sons? Lost to battle in an accident with a horse cart. Oh. It is past us now. What of your family? I have not taken a wife yet. Well, I seem to recall that you had many brothers and sisters in that forbidden castle of yours. Ah. Yes. Cards on the table. Martius pulled off his crown and fiddled with it. They're made up. It was all propaganda. After a long pause, Decius pulled off his own headdress, mussing his long hair, and spoke. Are you telling me that neither of us has a single marriageable relation? It would seem that way. After a second, Martius laughed. Well, there's always us. Yes, Decius laughed in return. There is always us. Their laughter trailed off into embarrassed silence. All right then, Decius said, looking up at Martius. All right then, Martius echoed. He half smiled and met his partner's eyes. Do you like board games? You know what? Decius said. I do. How did I end up like this? Rhaegar the Terrible, breaker of bonds, destroyer of the peace of Aride, found himself dressed in an ornate gown, clenching a bouquet of spirit flowers in his trembling arms. He had drawn the short straw and had to appear as a woman before Varn. His dress was made of the finest linen in the two realms, intricate designs embellished the white fabric. A deep V-neck revealed his broad hairy chest, pocketed with scars of countless battles. According to tradition, the piece was finished with 77 bells to honor the gods. The cannonballs in his stomach rolled around, his hands were sweaty, knees heavy. It was a sensation he'd never experienced before that overtook his all. Is this what fear feels like? He reflected. Nonsense. I fear no man. He shook his head. Quinn's face kept coming back. Deep down Rhaegar knew better. Waiting for his other half to show up filled him with unfathomable anxiety. He better not chicken out. I'll destroy his kingdom for sure if he leaves me hanging like this. No matter the cost. Rhaegar looked back to the giant wooden doors again. His partner could appear from any minute now. Quinn was much too late. Any moment. He'll come. We signed a contract. Made a vow. He's not stupid enough to call of our deal. Even Quinn the madman wouldn't dare break a promise made in the Temple of Varn. The ancient god who created the world was simply too terrifying to thwart. Breaking a promise made under the ancient slight meant 1,000 years of despair, or so the legend foretold. None had the guts to test it. He covertly tried to steal a glance at the crowds gathered in the ancient's temple. The auditorium was filled with high-placed individuals. Lords. Generals of both armies. The rich. The powerful. The influential. Their nephews, uncles and brothers. Lined up on wooden benches. They kept to their own camps. But all had come to witness the bonding of the most powerful men in the world. Fleeting stares went all over the place, studying the richly placated ornaments in the temple. Rhaegar knew they weren't interested in the golden statues of the gods. Most just preferred not to incur the wrath of one of the great warlords. Rhaegar felt a kinship with their wavering faces. Just like Rhaegar, they rather found themselves anywhere else, anywhere but here. The vast majority of the audience was too smart to do anything stupid. They used their training to make their looks of wonder appear genuine. They knew the stories too well. But there were a few brave individuals who dared look in his general direction. Fools and idiots with aspirations too high for their feeble lives. Some of them tried to keep straight faces, clenching their butts on the hard wooden benches, acting as if this was an everyday occurrence. But a couple of the foolhardy ones snickered upon seeing the great warlord dressed as a bride. Rhaegar engraved their faces in his mind. I'll get my inquisitors to deal with them later. His gaze continued over the atrium, looping back to the front row, finding his mother staring right at him, shaking her head. He yanked his gaze away, bells ringing with the movement. Flustered, he proceeded studying the grains of wood on the altar. It was very fine. Blast. I look ridiculous. This is all just a farce of that damned Quinn. I'll get him for this. He felt torn with emotions he didn't know existed. Rhaegar had never felt so out of his league as today, so out of place. His battle with the Hounds of Hastings paled in comparison. He'd gladly fight 1,000 more shadow monsters if it got him out of this place. Anything to stop feeling the way he did now. I'll give him 1 more minute. And then. He stopped, unable to finish his thought. And then what? The images of rows of dead men filled his vision, most of them kids with dreams of glory. The tangy smell of blood lingered in his nostrils. Thoughts of warfare left a void in his heart. He felt incredibly empty thinking about the uncountable dead who had given their lives in their belief of something greater than themselves. Their belief in him. He felt like a traitor to their dreams. What am I going to do? Kill everyone? Why is that always my solution? A stone was bound to his soul, dragging him down. Is this guilt I feel? His greatest achievement in life was death. 27 years of warmongering, fighting humans, demons, and dragons had sharpened his killer instincts to superhuman levels. He had spent his entire adult life destroying whatever, or whomever was unfortunate enough to cross paths with him. A lifetime spent on the battlefields had granted him the title of Great Warlord. There was no enemy he couldn't defeat. None. None until Quinn, his greatest adversary, the man he would marry to finally get the peace he so desired. And now he was beating him by not showing up. Bosran. How long before we have to cancel the ceremony? He asked, unsure what he was hoping for. Why do I feel so bad? Excuse me, but do you truly want to end the marriage? I'm not sure if that's a good idea. The Bosran spoke, voice drenched in fear, looking up in the direction of Varn. You know what that means. He swallowed. Continuing. But if you want to we can of course. The doors slammed open. All eyes in the temple went from the front to the back, staring at the disheveled figure standing in the opening. Quinn's clothes were torn, his eyes were red, bags under his eyes indicated he'd been up all night. Even so, Ragger felt his heart beat faster, the lead in his stomach leap, releasing him from the weight for a moment. You've come. He whispered. Warmth radiated throughout his body. Why did it make him so happy to see the rough, riddled face of the greatest enemy he had ever faced? Ragger. Quinn trembled, unsteady on his feet. Why do I feel this way? He grabbed hold of the door for support. Tell me. What have your witches done to me? He screamed. I shouldn't feel this way. It's not right. He lifted an accusing finger. It's all your fault. You and your amazing crystal blue eyes. Your manliness. Your wit and passion. Quinn, have you been drinking? Ragger asked, bewildered to see the sorry state of his rival. Vomit stained his grisly suit. Damn right I've been drinking. But it didn't work. I still feel so warm and fuzzy each time I think of you. He stopped, heaving. Tell me how to lift this curse. Quinn spat. I have no idea what you're talking about. Ragger mumbled, fumbling with the bouquet. Don't play stupid. We both know that you've got witches to toy with the emotions of others. Tell me why you played with mine. Isn't it bad enough that we've got to marry for peace? What more do you want of me? Quinn's tirade hit Ragger like a brick wall. His insides tearing apart, crushed under the terrible accusations of his greatest adversary. Do you mean that? He found himself whisper. What's that? Speak up, man. I've never seen you this speechless before. Even if you look like this, I know you're twice the man I am. That's why I love you. A gasp went over the audience who had been holding their breath so far. Their eyes darted left and right, hoping not to miss any of the drama enveloping right before them. What did you say? Ragger asked, dropping the spirit flowers, shocked by the huge reveal. You say you love me? He felt so happy. Did I just say that aloud? Quinn asked incredulously. You did. Stick, Quinn cursed. I'm such a fool. What you must think of me. He threw up his arms. Go ahead. Laugh. Laugh all you want. You've finally got your victory. Quinn shook his head and turned around, storming out of the temple. Wait. Ragger held up his arm to catch the image fleeing the scene. He jumped to the podium but constricted by the layers of fabric he tripped and fell. His insides burned in agony. He didn't care anymore. Quinn. Wait. He crawled up, looking out the open doors. Quinn was already halfway down the stairs. He had to hurry. I love you too. Ragger felt as if chains holding him down for so long were released. He felt freer than ever before. I love you. He had always loved him. Quinn paused. Head peeking over the stairs, looking back into the temple. His emerald eyes found Rhaegar's crystal blues. Their souls molten together. Neither dared speak, words would break the spell. The moment the two warlords shared seemed to last forever, suspended in the air as fragile and fleeting as the first day of spring. Rhaegar basked in the warmth that radiated from within. His stomach fluttered. The audience held their breath, scared, shocked, bewildered. The bells struck 12, breaking the spell that bound the two in that single, infinite, moment, reverberating throughout Varn's home. His statue in the center illuminated the scene. The audience released a sigh of relief as they walked over to each other. The two warlords met under the giant doors, interlocking their calloused hands, looking out over the kingdoms they had fought over for so long. Facing each other truthfully for the first time. How did we end up like this? Behu-Jun never married. How could he have the time? His youth was possessed by his father's campaign to unify the West provinces in the face of the encroaching North. His father's death at Mount Echang meant Behu-Jun was to take over his mantle and unify the Western people. Behu-Jun was the age of a man who could have married thrice over by the time the last of the provinces were dragged to heel. And how was he meant to marry after the unification of his people, when the warlord of the North took advantage of his absence and struck his own campaign against Behu-Jun's West? Unfortunately for Swan-Woo-Jun of the North, Behu-Jun had earned his title. Despite his weary men, his famished people, and his advancing age, he was still one of the greatest warriors and strategists of their generation. Unfortunately for Behu-Jun, Swan-Woo-Jun was his equal. Their forces met in mountain passes, in open plains, built and besieged forts, gained ground only to lose it again the next year. Only now their forces were depleted and the men of the south were sailing up through the sea, led by a boy so wet behind the ears he had no respected title, and alone Behu-Jun had no chance of defeating him. The ever-clever Swan-Woo-Jun had similarly dire straits. What need did a northern man such as him have of a navy? So now they wrote treatises, sent messengers with honeyed words and promises. Behu-Jun was many things, and a poet was not one. For each new correspondence he felt more and more like an oath that Swan-Woo-Jun pulled along strings. Behu-Jun demanded the northern warlord come to string promises from his own lips, so that Behu-Jun might be able to counter him without calligraphy. He half believed that it would be Ballista that would meet him on the shore of the Lua River as opposed to Swan-Woo-Jun, and only barely managed to save his face when it was his nearly lifelong rival who stepped down from the black-lacquered palanquin on the river bank. Despite the nigh on 20 years of war between them, Behu-Jun had never met Swan-Woo-Jun, had only seen portraits and heard second-hand tales from his men of Swan-Woo-Jun's latest great escape. He was older than Behu-Jun expected him to be, but that may have been because the portrait he'd seen of Swan-Woo-Jun was as old as their feud. You picked a place of beauty, if not neutrality, for our meeting. Swan-Woo-Jun's voice was as smooth as his letters, soft and melodious. It was hard to fathom that this was the man that has vexed Behu-Jun for so long. You didn't offer anything better. Was I meant to deliver myself to Tianfengguang? Behu-Jun bristled as he spoke, his neck coloring under his whiskers. He moved to join Swan-Woo-Jun at the low table on the temporary pavilion that had been erected by their men. Through his anger, Behu-Jun noted to himself that already their men were working well together. They'd had a morning to construct the pavilion, and while it lacked elegance, so did he. They were all growing desperate for peace. Behu-Jun inhaled deeply through his nose and accepted the tea that Swan-Woo-Jun offered him, and didn't comment on Swan-Woo-Jun's sly smile. I wouldn't have objected had you delivered yourself to me. I've wanted to meet you for some time, Swan-Woo-Jun said after Behu-Jun had taken his first drink of tea. Behu-Jun drowned the downturn of his lips in another sip. He'd hoped seeing Swan-Woo-Jun's face as they negotiated would give him an advantage, but Swan-Woo-Jun's faint smile was more inscrutable than a woman's fan. I only offer marriage to you, Behu-Jun plowed on, squinting at the reflect of the sun on the river so that he might not be mired in Swan-Woo-Jun's black eyes. You've earned nothing less, nor more. Turned as he was, he missed the 2 spots of pink that blossomed on Swan-Woo-Jun's bare cheeks. You've no sons, he said slowly, and Behu-Jun resisted the urge to flinch. No daughters, no sisters, and no cousins, nor even an aunt. The last aunt passed of a fever, did she not? Xuan Wujun paused to allow Bei Hujun to respond. He nodded, slowly, tucking his chin to his chest thoughtfully. "I've no family but myself," Bei Hujun rumbled. Unbelievably, Xuan Wujun laughed, tucking his mouth behind his sleeve, deep smile lines forming at the corners of his eyes. "You surprise me, but I feel as if I should have expected you to match your namesake, in more than just looks." Was he teasing Bei Hujun? It was true that his whiskers, once pure black and a picture-perfect match for his wild, barely restrained hair, were now striped with white, his hair beginning to recede, but Bei Hujun wore this face with dignity. He was no great beauty, but a fierce man, with a warrior's look. "I accept, wholeheartedly. If only we had come to terms such as this 10, or even 15 years ago." Xuan Wujun continued lightly, and offered his tea to Bei Hujun in a toast. Unthinkingly, Bei Hujun returned the toast and the two drank to their oath. It would have been preferable if it had been wine, but tea would do for now. "You never gave your offer," he grunted to Xuan Wujun. Xuan Wujun smiled once again, the wrinkles on his brow creasing happily. "Did I not? Has this humble friend ever wed? Have I any children or family to offer to you? Is it not that I also have nothing to offer but myself?" He spoke with an airy voice. Bei Hujun didn't choke on his drink, but he did stare at Xuan Wujun for as long as he could without losing face. That man was as beautiful as he always was, despite having been made gray and weathered with time. Still, his eyes were bright, his shoulders straight, and he was taller than Bei Hujun himself. Xuan Wujun even had thin, red lips like the most lovely of women. His pale skin was accentuated by the black silk brocade of his robes. For a moment, Bei Hujun felt the urge to defy convention and touch the silky strands of hair that fell from the bun Xuan Wujun restrained it in. Privately, Bei Hujun could acknowledge that his lack of marriage had not entirely been due to his lack of time, but inclination. He crossed his arms to hide the anxious trembling of his palms. "No, I suppose you have not ever offered me anything other than what is before me." Bei Hujun spoke carefully, mindful of keeping his customary growl from his voice. Xuan Wujun chuckled into his sleeve again. "Then it should be no issue for you to return to Tianfengguang at my side, once we have shown this southern boy just who rules the north united?" He reached across the table to lay long fingers on Bei Hujun's elbow, disregarding any boundaries. That man. His temper seizing him, Bei Hujun caught Xuan Wujun's fingers, silently pleased at the strength of the hand clasped within his own. What manner of wife places himself above his husband in honor? Bei Hujun snapped back. Xuan Wujun allowed himself to be caught. Bei Hujun was sure of it. They'd find some way of making this work. They had met in a true middle ground, between the flat fields of golden wheat and the hills of ashen rocks. There was a temple, one that served as a relic of time long since past. Generations of war had taken the land, scarring it, and splitting its people forevermore, at least that is what many thought. Here in the valley, between the darkness and light met two great warlords. Protector, scourger, and leader of each great nation. The ceasefire had only been called a few days prior, realizing that the bloodshed that had first been started by their great ancestors was now in danger of collapsing the world as they knew it. Both stayed their blades and instead sought peace for their collective survival. The man of gold, with his mighty warriors who marched far beyond the sown fields, finally at rest and fully willing to stand by their survival of fellow creature. Their excuse had always been that their god was the superior one, as all life rose with it in the morns. Yet still, the man of silver stood in the shadows and held just as tightly on his people's rocky, mountaintop capital. Still ever present and persistent. He too finally saw value in working together. No longer would his people starve and die, and at last he would bring rest to the world. They had lived centuries, the same two men. They had known each other before the conflict had started all that time ago, and had once even been seen as brothers, inseparable. But loyalties and bloodlines are a fickle thing, subject to quick change depending solely from which one you came. The tall giants of the Soleil Empire had been groomed into glamour and lush living, but had lost their values over time and grown uncaring for anything that did not shine gold. The pale gray and slim people of the Lun dynasty had instead been subject to starvation and famine, but still found ways to study and survive together. Both sides had strong wills of their own merit. However, when they each met for the first time in thousands of years at the Meridian Temple, They had no preface to give but a simple nod, neither had anything else left to fight with, and neither were willing to die. Peace was now the only option. "It is good to see you and all of your golden beauty again," said Loon, staying firmly attached to the marble walls of the temple to his side. He eyed the clearing beyond the Golden Man. It was the first time he had seen the golden fields since the war first began. It brought his heart both great sorrow over his actions, and great joy that such a time had finally ended. The large man stood proudly before him, smiling in a reminiscent way. "It is good to see you too." Soleil approached him first. The line marking the separation in the temple's loyalties had been crossed, a historical move for the Man of the Sun to be so bold. It made Loon chuckle, realizing that his friend had not truly changed. He too decided to leave the veritable safety of the marble wall and meet him. "You are as tall as ever, my dear old friend." He gave a cunning smirk to Soleil. Then things fell silent. They both seemed so tired. The bags under their eyes and memories, tired of war and pain. They both sat on a small bench near the middle of the circular place. "What happened, dear friend?" asked Soleil. "How did it ever get like this?" Loon looked so guiltily at him. "We should have known better. Our own blood blinded us to the suffering they have caused." He took a moment, his solid gray eyes of faint glimmer gazing sorrowfully beyond. Soleil raised a gentle hand to his shoulder. "We can put a stop to this again. It is time to put a stop to this, and restore the sun and moon to its rightful rotation." Loon looked to his friend, whose beautiful brown skin he had always cherished so had now been marked with scars aplenty. He smiled weakly, tossing a few frail strands of white hair behind his pointed ear. "No more depravity for my people. They will have the sun once more." He met Soleil's hand on his own shoulder. "No more ignorance for mine. They will rest easy now with the moon back in the skies again." Loon and Soleil then took each other in hand, and began their ritual. Only together could the world function, for their bloodlines were responsible for the turns of day and night, dawn and dusk. Reciting the old chant, the two at first sheepishly began to move about the room in a cadenced routine, but eventually they had remembered the feeling and the way their bodies moved together to form the union. As they moved, so too did the feeling in the air. The sun and moon moved to adjust, and no longer was the sky divided. The people of the rocky silvers rejoiced to see the brightness of daylight again, and the people of the beautiful gold celebrated the comforting and peaceful glow that settled onto them. Loon and Soleil had finally righted all the wrongs their family had caused all those years ago, and could again enjoy each other's company once more. They were free to do as they pleased, free to dance, free to love, free to live. And so too were their people. The building was empty, the wind blew through it like a soul whispering for attention, all was still and nothing moved. A peaceful moment among the bloodshed. Outside, battles had been fought, many men and women had died for their ruler. His name was King Rayer, a warlord of the Arab people. He had led his army to massive success. He however could no longer continue his bloody campaigns. Across the seas migrated a new warlord that Rayer had once fought, Queen Mildra of the Picts. They fought against each other like gods would fight against demons. However, peace was to come to this land through one way or another. The invading Rokaris from the south threatened the safety of the people. Both Mildra and Rayer knew what they had to do. Peace was to be established and represented by royal marriage. Yet, Mildra had no children nor Rayer, so they married each other. The discussions of marriage began in the holy grove of their priests. "How is it the Picts marry?" King Rayer asked Mildra, his long red beard swaying around his chest like a second shirt. It was rumored that it once caught an arrow and stopped him from getting shot in the heart. "We Picts take a trip to the nearest mountain and marry ourselves secretly there, and they're the wife and husband." "Well, you know," she answered, her red hair falling back behind her head. "It was rumored that it was the gods that gave her that hair. We walk a long distance and then grow a king's oak, on the land where it was planted. We do what you are talking about," the king answered, and the queen kept watch on his clear blue eyes as it looked towards the grove and the altars that were set up. They decided after that it was settled that they would carry on their journey towards the northern reaches of the lands where a great mountain lay, and that they then will plant the king's oak. They started their journey on the first rising sun of the next day. The king and queen wore surprisingly little for their position, a simple amount of armor, a sword, a king's oak and a single chariot for them to share. The chariot was small and pushed them close together. They didn't really know each other, so it was uncomfortable to say the least. Night came and the two set up camp. They ate and drank their fill and then rested by the fire. "So tell me, king of the era, what motivates you?" Queen Mildred asked him, and the great king looked at her puzzled. "People like us don't go on to unifying campaigns just for fun. My people, era, is what motivates me," the king said, and the queen rolled her eyes. "You wouldn't understand. For years my people have been enslaved. I fear these Roriki will be the next," the king answered and looked up to the queen. "What motivates you?" "My lands. We've had our lands taken from us more than once. We've been driven into your lands and we fought each other for years, killing thousands in the process. I just want land for the pigs to live on," the queen said, and the two stared at each other for the rest of the night. The next day the two went up towards the mountain. They planted the great king oak and did the thing that I can't say on Reddit. The tree grew as the bond between the king and queen grew, and together they made a brilliant kingdom. The king oak grew high enough that it saw the king and queen take the original Pictish land back, and when the couple died by Roriki arms, the tree fell down its mountain cliff to death. However, it was the corpse of this great tree that made the pathway for the next two warlords to make a pilgrimage to get married. It saw the love of them and stayed silent, with its thousands of king oak brothers and sisters that named the mountain Taladalari, or the King Oak Land. "This is a bit rushed." Ferdinand, warlord of Aragon, spoke to the warlord of Castile. "We must stop our infighting," he said, "it only weakens us." Isabella, warlord of Castile, spoke. "We must not only stop fighting, we must unite to fight our enemies." "I propose a marriage alliance," said Ferdinand. "I agree," said Isabella, "but I will be in charge, and I will run the Muslims out of Spain." "You can be in charge," said Ferdinand meekly, "but you can't tell anyone that I'm not in charge. That would be too embarrassing." "Done," said Isabella. And #X200B. And so started the bloody reign of Ferdinand and Isabella. Some URL. Bellum and Pax glared daggers at each other from across the pavilion, and with years of combat etched into their bodies, each is a terrifying sight. Vox, the council's designated speaker, is a short but rotund man dressed in bright colors with an artificial smile plastered onto the bottom of his face. Despite all his effort to coerce the smile into reaching his eyes, he fails in this. Vox speaks through gritted teeth, fearing that the unclenching of his jaw will lead to facial expressions and vocal tones that would shatter his illusion of calm. Unbeknownst to him, there was only person present under such an illusion: Vox. "You two have been a blight on the nation surrounding yours for nearly a decade, and it's time to end it. We of the council have decided to give you a choice. Option 1, we administer the most heinously dishonorable deaths we can imag. Oh good. Am I to expect you to come up with something interesting?" Pax asks sardonically. "That/would/be dishonorable," Bellum replies matter-of-factly. Vox, as Hugh approaches the cardinal of his W. Bellum and Pax glare daggers at each other from across the pavilion, and with years of combat etched into their bodies, each is a terrifying sight. Vox, the council's designated speaker, is a short but rotund man dressed in bright colors with an artificial smile plastered onto the bottom of his face. Despite all his effort to coerce the smile into reaching his eyes, he fails in this. Vox speaks through gritted teeth, fearing that the unclenching of his jaw will lead to facial expressions and vocal tones that would shatter his illusion of calm. Unbeknownst to him, there was only person present under such an illusion: Vox. "You two have been a blight on the nation surrounding yours for nearly a decade, and it's time to end it. We of the council have decided to give you a choice. Option 1, we administer the most heinously dishonorable deaths we can imag. Oh good. Am I to expect you to come up with something interesting?" Pax asks sardonically. "That/would/be dishonorable," Bellum replies matter-of-factly. Vox, as Hugh approaches the cardinal of his waistcoat. "As I was saying, we end you. We merge your lands. We of the council will then rule over it on rotation." "Would that rotation be yours or the council's?" Bellum asks. "The council's." Vox's face now matches his waistcoat. Option 2. He seethes. "A peace contact and a political marriage. Your families will intertwine and the war will end. You will cease to wreak havoc and your people will not have an occupying force looming over them." He speaks rapidly to avoid interruption. Bellum and Pax agree to the second option, disdain radiating from both parties. Vox, just as displeased with their decision, pulls a scroll from its case within his podium. "Then you will both sign this immediately." Vox reads the terms aloud and the two warlords sign it. "Now who will be getting married?" Vox inquires. Moments later, Bellum and Pax realize they've made an unfortunate error. There are no living women in either of their families. Pax eventually suggests that he and Bellum marry. Bellum is infuriated at first but acquiesces when Vox threatens his people with occupation once more. It's been 5 years since the treaty was signed in this spot and peace was finally implemented. Vox articulates to the assembly, prattling on about things that don't affect plot in any way. Meanwhile, Uticum is bending the ears of Bellum and Pax. "I talked them into it, you know." "How did you manage that?" Pax. "I reminded them that occupation is often unpleasant for the occupiers." Vox was the only one adamantly against it, in the end. "I must thank you for rallying in our favor like that, Judy. This arrangement has some definite benefits." Bellum lays a possessive hand on Pax's thigh, grinning. "And some drawbacks. We need a way to carry on our lineage," Pax says with a frown. "A prostitute would be too illegitimate, we need a more indefinite solution." Pax. "You know, I think my country could use a stronger alliance," Uticum says with a grin. "I want to put more effort into this but it's 7 a.m. and I'm just now going to sleep. I feel like my effort here was definitely erratic." The Holy Church man raised his fist high into the sky, and the roaring crowd below the church steps fell into a hushed hum. "We come together today to join in holy matrimony, Lord Xandrith the Bold of House Ecclesiast, ruler of Snarkadia, and Exaltage and Dun of the Mukdu peoples. With this wedding, we end the war plaguing our lands for centuries." To the left, Lord Xandrith stood, bedecked in the traditional Snarkadian fur and claws, well shined for the occasion. To the right, Exaltage and Dun stood, bedecked in the traditional Mukduk silver armor, well shined for the occasion. They looked at the Holy Church man unwaveringly, hands clasped together in front of them. As no available daughters, sisters, nieces or female cousins on either side are available, this matrimony will join their two houses forever, sealing peace between our countries for all time. Xandrith finally looked at Jindun for the first time, and smiled shyly, blushing. "You may now kiss the bride." Jindun swept up Xandrith into her arms, and Xandrith swooned into the kiss, firmly holding Jindun's round cheeks in both of her thin hands. A cheer went up over the crowd. The happy couple parted, holding hands and facing their adoring people. Xandrith leaned closely to Jindun, and whispered, "Thank Void we live in a matriarchy. Can you imagine if we were both men?"